Hello everyone and welcome to today's research seminar brought to you by the Department of English and Communication at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Today's speaker is Dr. Jonathan Ngai, who is an assistant professor at the Hong Kong Metropolitan University. He is currently investigating academic, journalistic and promotional texts with a focus on stance, style and rhetoric. This year, 2022, he published a book with Routledge, which has the same title as the talk he will give today. Just before I hand over, again, as always, if you're too shy to ask questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll moderate the chat and I'll ask them at the end. Of course, we'll give preference to those who do actually put their hands up. Okay, so without further ado, I hand over to Dr. Ngai.
So good evening, everyone. I don't normally start a presentation with an apology, but I think I probably have to do it because today I've done 4 hours of teaching, so my voice is not perfect. But think more about the quality of my content than the quality of my voice. Okay, so today's topic is evaluation across newspaper genres, hard news, stories, editorials, and feature articles. A topic that I've been working for some years. And the aim of this talk is very simple: to consider how evaluation plays a vital and yet dynamic role in constructing 3 major genres. That is hard news stories, editorials, and feature articles. And to achieve this aim, I will cover the following: corpus makeup, nature and importance of evaluation, framework of analysis, frequency of use of evaluative markers in the corpus, main discourse functions performed by evaluation, so what evaluation actually does in the 3 different newspaper genres. So these 5 are a kind of stage setting. So they are meant to set the stage for this one, which is the focus of this talk. That is evaluation across newspaper genres. And then I will end with a bit of summary and implications. Okay, so what is evaluation and why does it matter? I'm sure some of you have seen this quote before. Well, not exact wording, but then this is something from Thompson and Huston. So evaluation is basically about expressing attitudes, opinions, and feelings. And it is said to have the following characteristics: representing subjective meaning, often used to reference and construe ideologies which may constitute a shared value system. So when you express your opinions, you are expressing a certain set of beliefs, and this certain set of beliefs may constitute a shared value system. And there are 2 main types of evaluation. The first one is explicit, also called inscribed. The other one is implicit, also called invoked. My research mainly has to do with explicit evaluation. Okay, so another characteristic is whether evaluation is avowed and attributed. So if it is avowed, it comes from the author of the text. If it is attributed, it comes from people other than the author of the text. And my research has to do with authorial evaluation, explicitly evaluative markers used by journalists. And the next point has to do with categories of evaluative meanings. Some people use this term parameters, some other people might use dimensions. I use dimensions. And another characteristic is evaluation being multifunctional, so it can serve many functions. So this is from these 2 scholars. And here I have some other views of evaluation. Yeah, the first two have more to do with viewing evaluation as a strategy. And the next two has more to do with seeing evaluation as a central feature of communication or text. And then this one has to do with evaluation being genre specific, which means evaluation use varies from genre to genre. Now, while I agree with all the views expressed in these slides, I would like to argue that evaluation, which is ubiquitous, that is pervasive in text, and multifunctional and genre specific, plays a vital and yet dynamic role in constructing hard news stories, editorial and feature articles. And by focusing on evaluation use across the genres, the three genres that I'm dealing with here, we may be able to get a unified perspective from which to understand fully how the three newspaper genres are linguistically and rhetorically constructed. So I hope the ultimate aim of this talk is to show you or share my thoughts with you about this point. That is, evaluation contributes vitally, but in significantly different ways to the construction of hard news stories, editorials, and feature articles. Okay, now the data for my research comes from this corpus, which I built. So it's a 900,000 word specialized corpus of SCMP newspaper texts, which were arranged by genre and topic domain. So for each topic, there are 100,000, right? Yeah. So a total of 300,000 here. Okay, and about 300,000 here, about 300,000 here. And of course, by genre and by topic domain. And through this specialized corpus, I hoped I could find more information about genre specificity and topic specificity. And then to identify, sorry, I think this is hiding what I want to show you. Never mind, yeah. Anyway, to identify and categorize effective meaning or markers, I developed this framework, which is called a framework of evaluative dimensions. And it has basically two main functions. So the two main features. One is that it's got 5 evaluative dimensions, parameters, and each dimension has 2 sides. So this is the first dimension, the goodness and badness dimension, also the most important one, the overarching one, because a lot of time when we express evaluation, we either express approval or disapproval, okay? And this is the second one, which has to do with indicating importance and unimportance. This one, usualness and usualness, and then this one, emotion. Of course, it can be divided into positive emotion and negative emotion. And this one has to do with hedging. And this one, sorry, this is boosting and this is hedging, all right? So each side, each dimension has 2 sides, and that's one feature. Another feature is that it has a strong orientation to values in newspaper texts. Values in newspaper texts refer to the criteria for the construction and presentation of value of a news events. And such values drive the construction of newspaper text. So if a news event has a value like a negativity, then is newsworthy. So if you find a headline like chaos at the airport, then it means this news story has this new value of negativity, and then is expressed through a balance marker like chaos or confusion. So news values or values in newspaper text can be expressed or enhanced through evaluative language or evaluative markers. So that's the rationale behind all this. Okay, now this slide just gives you some examples of evaluative markers, different types of evaluative markers. So we've got goodness markers here, badness markers, importance markers, and they are some of the most frequently occurring evaluative markers in my corpus. Okay, now this slide shows you the extent of evaluation use among the different newspaper genres. And as you can see here, news stories have the least extensive evaluation use. Editorials have the most extensive evaluation use. And then feature articles are something in between, a little bit more than news stories, but far less than editorials. Now, you might ask why. Well, here is the main reason. Evaluation use in newspaper genre, in each newspaper genre, is bound up with its committed purpose and, of course, writing conventions. So hard news stories are meant to report events and inform readers. So not much room for subjectivity or authorial evaluation, and therefore they can be said to be evaluatively constrained. This is a term I think of White Martin and White used in their work. Editorials are very different. They are heavily laden with evaluative meanings because they are free to evaluate events and persuade readers. Feature articles, as I said before, are something in between. So they are less evaluatively constrained than hard news stories, but much more so than editorials. And this is the reason. They do inform and persuade, and then they might also entertain readers. But then the thing is, feature articles rely a lot on attributed material. They use a lot of quoted material, and that is something I did not really consider in counting evaluative markers. Now, this slide shows you the main discourse functions performed by evaluation as identified in the SCMP corpus. So hard news stories perform all these one. Yeah, those in italics are the most important ones, and they are the perspective from which I mainly look at evaluation in each genre. Yeah, I'll talk more about that in a moment. So lots of discourse functions performed by evaluations across these three different newspaper genres. How did I identify them? Well, I did a couple of things. I referred to previous studies of different newspaper genres by linguists and journalists. And of course, I also spent lots of time poring over concordance lines. And if necessary, I also went back to the whole texts under discussion. Okay, so I hope I have set the stage for this part, which is the focus of this discussion. Okay, now in this part, I will focus on the evaluation across the 3 newspaper genres. The first point that I want to emphasize, in fact, I have mentioned quite briefly, is the very close relationship between genres and commit purposes. Hard news stories, editorials, feature articles have distinct commit purposes and have systematic linguistic differences associated with their different purposes. And then such linguistic differences are clearly seen in the significantly different ways different types of evaluative markers are distributed and used in the 3 newspaper genres. So to illustrate this, I will first look very briefly at some uses of certain markers across the 3 newspaper genres. And then I will focus on emotion markers. Now, this is inevitable because it's just impossible for me to look at all the 10 different types of evaluative markers in detail. But just by looking at this rather briefly and focusing on this in depth, in more detail, you will be able to get an idea of how evaluation works in these 3 genres and therefore contributes to their construction. Okay, so certainty markers are actually boosters. Now, 2 things can be said about such uses of certainty markers across the 3 newspaper genres. Number 1, such certainty markers like certainty adverbs are unevenly distributed across the 3 newspaper genres. So you can see we have lots of certainty markers in this editorial subcorpus, quite less, yeah, quite fewer than this in the feature article subcorpus, and very, very few certainty adverbs in the hard news subcorpus. And of course, it has to do with what I have highlighted here. Okay, so this is about the attribution. No surprise, I think. Now, what is really interesting is this. This is the second thing I like to talk about. That is, evaluative markers often perform not just one function. In other words, they often perform more than one function simultaneously. There is nothing wrong with saying that certain markers reinforce the force of what is being said. But then what certain markers may also do in newspaper genres like editorials and feature articles is that they may also be setting up a concessive relation by doing it this way, by putting together a certainty marker and then a contrastive conjunction like but or however or yet. All right, so this is something from feature article. So what is said in the first sentence is valid, important, but less than what comes next. So this is what the writer wants to emphasize. In editorials, I find more examples of such use. So this is one from one editorial, and this one is a bit longer, and this is from another editorial. Okay, now what I want to draw your attention to is this one. This one is fairly long, right? But again, the certainty marker obviously here is not just reinforcing what the force of being, what is being said, but also setting up concessive relations. So let's take a look at how it actually works here. All right, so the writer, the editorial writer, uses 3 sentences to talk about the first statement. All right, you can actually call it a concession. So everything before yet is a concession, something important, but less important than what comes after yet. All right. And of course, here I removed something. Otherwise, you will see that the writer is actually elaborating on this point. So this is concession. What goes before yet is concession, and what comes after yet is an assertion. And this assertion is more important than the author. And that's why the writer will elaborate on it. But like I said, I just omitted that part. All right. So what we see here is an evaluative rhetorical structure. So they work together to form this rhetorical structure. And even though this is a bit far away from this, it is still very clear that this is working together with this to form this rhetorical structure. So to use the term by Chow and Thompson, this is an example of evaluative coherence. So there is not just coherence, but also evaluation going on here. So this is for certainty markers across the 3 newspaper genres. Now, certainty lexical verbs. Here, the differences are not that big, right? Not as unevenly distributed as the one here. But it's understandable. Why? Because in all these 3 genres, this is very important. You need to use a certainty marker like show to attribute information, to tell your reader whose information you are using. So this is from editorial, this is from feature article, and this is from hard news. All right, so much for certainty markers. Now I will really focus on emotion evaluation across the 3 newspaper genres. Okay, now the main purpose of focusing on emotion evaluation across the 3 genres is to provide a more unified perspective on evaluation use. Emotion evaluation, of course, is concerned with human feelings, and it is used to reveal how people react emotionally to events and how they're evaluated in emotional terms. And in journalistic writing, emotion evaluation has a special place. So here are some views by not linguists, but journalists. So this is one view. Yeah, so it's a personalization strategy. And is a strategic ritual of emotionality. And then the next one is even broader in meaning different newspaper genres have their own conventions for managing affectivity, which means something like emotion or emotionality. So what they've got in common is emotion is not just about this. It's not just about human feelings. Journalists also talk about them to do something else, to construct their news stories, feature articles, editorials. Just to return to this very important point about evaluation use in newspaper genres. Yeah, so evaluation use in each newspaper genre is closely linked with its communique purpose and writing conventions. All right, so a lot of what happens in newspaper genres when it comes to evaluation use can be seen in terms of this. And here, I like to take things a little bit further by arguing that evaluation use in each newspaper genre can be profitably studied or understood from the perspective of the factor considered the most instrumental in its construction. So these are three questions about them. How does evaluation or emotion evaluation contribute to story design in new stories? So if I'm also talking about other types of evaluations, I would do away with emotion, but now we are just focusing on emotion. And then for editorials, I think we can look at how evaluation contributes to argumentation. And then for feature articles, we can look at how evaluation contributes to human interest. This one, by the way, means a story construction. You know, when journalist is writing a news story, their main concern is to create a well-formed story. So they want to get the news angle right and then to develop it in the rest of the story. And this one is about persuading the reader of a certain point of view. So that's why editorial writing is pretty much about argumentation. And then human interest has to do with what is of interest or relevance to the readers. So a lot of what is done in a feature article is to make this stand out. Yeah, it's the most important value in feature articles. So here I am looking at how evaluation contributes to the construction of the three genres from a more macro perspective. Of course, I do not just talk about them in isolation. I really talk about how the different discourse functions can really contribute to this. All right. So yeah, we have seen this, the first two columns already. We have also seen this very briefly, and I would argue that these discourse functions performed by evaluation contribute to this story design. So they play a very important role in this, and then these discourse functions play a very important role to editorial argumentation. And then these discourse functions performed by evaluation also plays a very important role in constructing human interest. And of course, in this part, I have only time to focus on how emotion evaluation contributes to this. All right, so let's first look at the distribution of positive emotion markers in the three newspaper genres. I guess there is no surprise here, right? Again, this is the least evaluative constraint, all right? In other words, the most extensive use of evaluation, not much, yeah, so a bit more than this, yeah. And then negative emotion markers, yeah. So here we have more for news stories, yeah, because news stories are pretty much about negativity, yeah. But then we still have the most in the editorial corpus, yeah. Less here. Okay, now let's first look at how emotion evaluation contribute to hard news story design. In writing a news story, the journalists will first of all get this right. Actually, the lead, because the headline is actually written by a sub-editor. So the journalist goes to great lengths to getting the lead right. That is the introduction, which attracts attention and sets the news angle. And here is an example. So this is the headline, this is the lead. And of course, there is a very close relationship between them. Okay. So here I argue that emotion markers, like other types of evaluative markers, if used strategically and skillfully in the headline lead opening, are potentially useful for attracting the reader's attention, setting the news angle, and summarizing the news. And in fact, this can be seen in the data here. All right. So what I have done was to create a subcorpus for all the headline lead openings, which were treated together. Okay. And this is total number of words here. And then I also created another subcorpus which contain all the remaining paragraphs. So all the other paragraphs except the headline lead openings. All right, and so this is the total number of words for this subcorpus, and this is the total number of words for this subcorpus. Now here, although this subcorpus has fewer words than this subcorpus, it actually contains more emotion markers than this one. So you can see there is a tendency for emotion markers to concentrate in this part for such functions. Now here, if you look at the figures very closely, you can also see that this is relatively more frequent than this. Yeah, because here you have about 6 times more words than this one. All right, but then this has about 2 times less than this number. Yeah, so relatively speaking, this is quite frequent, I would say. Let's now move on to evaluation in editorials. All right, now, yeah, this is what we have seen before. So in editorials, we have quite extensive use of emotion markers. Yeah, so here are some frequent emotion markers. Yeah, positive and negative. Okay, so here are some examples. Yeah, this one. So this is my main point here. Yeah, quite often editorials writers write about emotions, not just to talk about how people react emotional to events. They also want to appeal to readers' sentiments and then to construct their arguments. So we have sentences showing emotions here, right? Like this, like this, like this, like this. Yeah, like this. So I'll see if I can really talk a little bit more about this one. Yeah, I still remember what it's about. Yeah. Okay, just like this one. Okay, so I remember this appears at the very beginning of the second paragraph, which is about this thing. All right, so small eateries decided not to serve sharp things to their customers. And I remember that paragraph starts with this sentence. Now you can just imagine the editorial writer could actually have done away with this. So he or she could have, you know, just talked about this without mentioning this feeling. Okay, yeah, but by throwing this in, the writer is trying to achieve this. And in fact, the rest of this paragraph is to elaborate on this idea. Yeah, I still remember the writer gives two examples here. And then make a bit of conclusion like this is a welcome development. So just by this example, you see the writer is not just interested in talking about this human feeling. What he or she is actually interested is to connect emotionally with readers, and of course, more importantly, construct their arguments. All right, now what about feature articles? How does emotion evaluation contribute to its construction? First of all, let's look at the distribution of evaluative markers. Yeah, we have actually seen this very briefly. Yeah, so we are just revisiting it. Yeah, so not many, but still can be quite instrumental in the construction of this genre. So here we have the most frequent positive emotion markers. And I think it is quite encouraging to see that in this type of feature article, we have a lot of positive emotion markers. You know, we are all in the education sector, and it seems that there are a lot of positive feelings among us. Yeah, so we are positive and so on. Yeah, so this is just a continuation of the previous slide. Yeah, so lots of positive emotion markers in this type or category of feature article. All right, now negative emotion markers. Yeah, concern is definitely very frequently used here. Okay. Now here I argue that emotion markers, like other types of evaluative markers, can contribute to human interest. Of course, it doesn't mean in other topic domains, evaluative markers are not used. They are actually used, yeah, as we have seen here. But I have found that, at least it seems to me, that emotion markers work in a more special way to represent people, particularly in terms of their personalities. So from the corpus, I have got these examples, you know, like this, like this, like this, yeah. And then this one. Now, just by looking at this one, you may have a feeling that the feature writer actually wants to emphasize one side or something about this person's personality, like his being a public spirited, being compassionate, yeah, and so on. Yeah, and this may be used to portray this person as a righteous person, somebody who is willing to speak out against injustices in the system. All right, so not just about how this person responds to something emotionally, but also may reveal something about his personality. Yeah, but unfortunately, I can't show you the whole text, but what I've said may have given you an idea. Okay. All right, now, so what I have done is actually very simple. Instead of talking about all the different types of evaluative markers in terms of their contribution to the construction of these three newspaper genres, I have talked about certain markers very briefly, and I have focused on emotion markers. Unfortunately, I can't show you the whole text. Otherwise, you might have had an even better idea. But I hope I have given you a sense of how evaluative markers may work in terms of the contribution to the three newspaper genres. So we have seen that emotion markers often, of course, it's not absolute, contribute to constructing the three newspaper genres in significantly different ways. Yeah. Firstly, hard news story design. Secondly, constructing human interest in feature articles, and then editorial argumentation. And of course, they might overlap in terms of functions, but then we have seen that emotion language use actually varies across the three newspaper genres, where emotion performs quite different specific functions. And I would stress that this fact is also true mostly of other types of evaluative markers. So if you look at badness markers, then you will see they are employed differently to construct the newspaper genres. Okay, so I like to end with some concluding remarks and implications. This may be of interest to those who want to work on evaluation in newspaper discourse and perhaps other genres as well. Okay, so I think it is fair to say evaluation is pervasive in text. It's multifunctional and genre specific, right? And in this talk, I have argued that evaluation plays a vital and yet dynamic role in constructing the three major newspaper genres under discussion: hard news stories, editorials, and feature articles. Yeah, and I have also stressed that evaluation use in each of the three newspaper genres is bound up with its common purpose. Yeah, and I have also emphasized this, I hope. Evaluation in newspaper genres can be properly studied from the perspective of the factor considered most instrumental in its construction. That is story design here, human interest here, and argumentation here. So that way you have perhaps a more macro view of how evaluation contributes to the construction of the three genres. And I hope I have also given the audience members a sense of this. Each newspaper genre often favors certain evaluative markers, as we have seen in those tables. Yeah, I've not talked much about this except in terms of those discourse functions. I have said a little bit about this. I said that evaluative markers, like emotion markers, tend to cluster in the headline lead opening in a news story. Yeah, because it is there to attract attention, set the news angle so that the rest of the article can be used to develop the news angle. Okay. I've also said a little bit about this. An act of evaluation may perform more than one discourse function simultaneously. So when I was talking about certainty markers and emotion markers, I said that they performed more than one function. So certain markers are not just used to reinforce the force of what is being said. They may also be used, to set up a concessive relation. So it's pretty much about argumentation. In fact, the use of certainty markers and doubt markers, which I've not mentioned, is very, very common in other genres to set up a concessive relation. Yeah, I was reading an article co-authored by two American writers. Yeah, they are talking about I think, a public opinion in the US. And in one single chapter, I see 3 examples of this. Yeah, I remember they used to be sure and then but. They use it 3 times in one single chapter. So something like this, I think, is worth noting and perhaps researching a bit more. And I also think it is necessary to distinguish very clearly between authority evaluations and non-authority evaluations. So if you are working on newspaper texts, you certainly find that it pays to make a clear distinction between them. Otherwise, you don't know whether the evaluations which you have identified have been made by journalists or by newsmakers. And I also think this is useful in analyzing evaluative language in newspaper discourse and perhaps in other genres as well. So structural analysis. So you look at different parts separately and see how those separate parts contribute to the construction of any genre under discussion. Yeah, so this is based on what has been said about textual colligation, a term which Ho and his colleagues have come up with to explain the linguistic fact that certain linguistic items tend to appear in certain positions for certain functions in texts. So I would argue that in order to have a better idea of how evaluation contributes to construction of newspaper genres, this is something that should be considered. Yeah, and then I have also, at least I hope I have been successful in doing this. That is focusing on evaluation provides a unifying perspective from which to understand genre specificity, which is what this talk is mainly about. I've also touched on this a little bit, but unfortunately we haven't really had the time to look at it in detail. So 2 more points. Yeah. So I think my work has lent empirical support to what Martin and White has observed. That is, variation in journalistic genres is ascribable, that is due to regularities in journalistic genres in the sense of the resources of appraisal. That is, how evaluation is used can be shown in the different ways in which evaluation is used in those newspaper genres. And I think this is a very powerful statement about how much evaluation can contribute to the distinctiveness of this or perhaps other newspaper genres as well. Okay. So the last point is about the pedagogical value of introducing evaluation to students. Well, given the importance, pervasiveness and multifunctionality of evaluation, I think we teachers should make students aware of evaluation, why it matters, how to identify it, and how to categorize it, so that we can understand more about how it contributes to the construction of texts. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.